Hello again, everybody, and welcome into the NEA Varsity Podcast, Episode 2. Appreciate everybody who listened or downloaded Episode 1, but we appreciate you guys listening to us on SoundCloud on the Episode 1. And Ryan, we've got a very special episode today because we're going to have our first guest here on the NEA Varsity Podcast.
Celebrity guest.
A legend among Northeast Arkansas high school football history, who he played for as a coach and who some of his teammates were. We're talking about Tab Slaughter, former offensive lineman for the Wynne Yellowjackets, played for the General, played for Coach Campbell down at Wynne, running the Diamond T. You know, you knew exactly what to expect with the Diamond T coming at you, and I figured Tab will talk a little bit about that. And even though it was predictable, it kind of reminds me of a line that Coach Boone had in Remember the Titans when he was talking about his playbook. He said it was just like Novocaine. Give it a little time, and it'll work every time. Let's get started with the interview here. Tab Slaughter, former Wynne Yellowjacket. NEA Varsity Podcast, Marcus Carlton, Ryan Fletcher, and joining us now is someone that I could say is a legend in Northeast Arkansas high school, just because not only of who he played for, but who he played with and what they accomplished. And then he went on to play for Arkansas State after his days at Wynne were done. And we're talking about a former offensive lineman for the Yellowjackets, Tab Slaughter. Tab, thank you for joining us on the NEA Varsity Podcast. Man, you're the first guest that we've had on this show.
Nice. I'm honored. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Absolutely.
Glad you could join us.
Pleasure is all ours. So, Tab, I mentioned briefly that you played for Wynne. Give us a kind of a timeline of when you played and a little bit about your time there playing for the Yellowjackets.
Yeah, so I played from high school from I guess it would have been the fall of 97 to 99. I was a graduating class of 2000. And, was obviously very fortunate to play, in a town that experienced a lot of success with the athletic program for as long as they have and still are today. Still enjoying a high level of success. And obviously for a, Arkansas Hall of Fame coach, Don Campbell, who, was assisted by some great guys, the likes of Ray Shempert, Mike Singleton, and various different people through the years. But even going down to the junior high level, James Westbrook and other guys that coached us were mainstays in that town forever. And anybody that knows anything about Coach Campbell and his legacy and his track record was the Diamond T offense, what we call 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And so what was cool about that is, from 7th grade on, you knew how to run the 27-43 trap, 28 sweep, and you could run any variation of it. So it was a really cool time period. It was really neat to grow up, when I was 5 years old and, obviously very impressionable in terms of I was playing T-ball and checking the football thing out when won the state championship in 1986. And so, from that time period, I was hooked. I'd caught in the fever, so to speak. But, was able to grow up around guys like the Morey brothers that both walked on at Arkansas and experienced some playing time there. And Eugene Maven and KC Maven, I played with their brother. Charlie Maven, who was a stud on that team, had a big sack in that Osceola game that was recovered by Aaron Dixon for a touchdown. Which you guys will recall, Aaron Dixon went on to play for Arkansas, had a great career up there. Jason South, Jake Harrelson, the Cobb brothers. I mean, just growing up in that town with the level of success they had with the caliber of athletes they had was really awesome and set the bar really high for guys like me that wanted to, achieve the same level of success.
Talk about dropping some names of some legends from the past. I mean, that's just kind of a who's who of Wynne Yellowjacket football right there. You mentioned Coach Campbell. Everybody's got a Coach Campbell story outside of the Diamond T and the mystique around it. Tell us a little bit about maybe something most people wouldn't know about playing for Coach Campbell.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something you can fully appreciate, obviously, while you're in it, because you don't always like it, while you're in it. But certainly when you get older and you get into the business world or whatever, avenue or path life takes you and you have kids, you understand, the importance of discipline and routine. And, I call it the rule of slight edge. And the rule of slight edge is, whether it's in business or athletics, everybody's got talent, everybody's getting paid, and everybody wants to win, but not everybody gets to win. That's just a reality you have to come to grips with. And, a simple reality about Coach Campbell is that, there's no secret formula in terms of, us drinking a certain amount of water or running a certain amount of sprints, because those towns are all very equitable in terms of how the talent is divided. They're all about the same size. You're all in the Mississippi Delta region. The demographics are very similar, but the difference was the level of discipline, the level of detail, and the culture that he created. Not only him, but the town, the expectations that we had, and just a relentless pursuit of a high level of success all the time. That's what was expected. And when you knew you got into the program, you knew that the expectations were reasonable, but they were very clear, and you're going to be held accountable to that. And it really never changed. I mean, I can recall a time in Newport my junior year when I was primarily a defensive player at the time. Myself and Aaron Dixon played the two defensive tackle positions together, and we had a guy hurt, and he threw me in the goal line package. It was actually 4th and short at about the 23. Not that I remember the details behind that kind of stuff, but we ran a play, and I wasn't very prepared, and I missed a block, and we got stuffed in the backfield. It's one of all the things that I remember, it's one of the things that sticks out because it's one of the bigger regrets that I have. And we ended up losing that game by a touchdown, but I think really just kind of the level of disappointment he had, and the fact that I didn't do what I was coached to do, and the level of disappointment I had in letting him and the team down. And and looking back on it, it certainly didn't lead to a loss, but it what it did was fueled you and motivated you to work all that much harder to get the details. He expected us to be perfect in everything we did, and certainly we weren't, but he held us to a very high standard. And it's something I think if you talk to most of the guys that played for him would tell you that, that those lessons that we learned have served us all well throughout the course of our life since that time.
Tab, we hosted a media day a couple weeks ago, which is new. It's the second time or second year in a row we've done it. So we bring all the schools in and do like an SEC media day or whatever, and we have the coach and several players up on the stage, and Wynne, of course, was there, and Coach Pascal, and had 3 players, and we talked a lot about Coach Campbell and the tradition there, and talked with Coach Pascal about how expectations are so high, and we didn't come right out and just say, hey, you got to watch it each and every year, because obviously losing's not acceptable there, but winning is certainly the thing that is expected. And as those young men came in, I never found them to be arrogant by any stretch of the imagination, but they came in very confident, knowing that they'd won the conference last year, expecting to do the same thing this year. So, you and the guys before you and the guys after that kind of have set the bar for the kids playing now and for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's just, you call it tradition, culture. It's like a aura, that existed around there growing up. And, it's not that we rattled off a ton of state championships, although they won a couple, when I was done. But it just, I forget what the numbers were, but, I looked at it at one point, and, there was a period of time where, in a 10-game season, when you averaged up Coach Campbell's wins, I think it was over like a 12-year period of time, again, in a 12-game regular season where, he was averaging over 12 wins a year when you put the playoffs in there too. And some tough playoff losses, late rounds of the playoffs. And obviously when D'Angelo and those guys came just behind us and won a state championship, but that's pretty exceptional when you think about the equity and just general talent in that area, and the amount of games we were able to win over that period of time is pretty incredible.
Well, it is incredible, and people still talk about it to this day. And another thing they talk about is some of the guys that you played with. We mentioned earlier that the timeline that when you were a Yellowjacket, one of the things we didn't mention was some of your teammates and just the amount of talent that you had in your teammates. You played with guys like Jerome Stegall and Antonio Warren, and a guy that no matter your age, if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably heard of this next guy, and his name is D'Angelo Williams. Tell us a little more about playing with that amount of talent at the skill position. You were on the offensive line, and you blocked a lot for those guys. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to describe, and again, it's something that you don't. You can't appreciate and realize when you're an 18-year-old kid or 17 or however old we were. But, what really sheds a light on it is when you look at the number of players that play, high school football, throughout the country, and just just a small few that are lucky enough and have enough ability or whatever to be able to play at any level of college football, much less the Division I level. And then you look back on, the number of years of all of that talent success that Wynne had and had never produced at least in the last 50 years before, Jerome Stegall and myself and Aaron Dixon signed. And we guess would have been February of 2000, had never produced a Division I scholarship athlete in the sport of football. And so when you think about the fact that there were three of us on one team, and, D'Angelo, who could have played, defensive back, and he was recruited by every SEC team to play corner and safety, but wanted to play running back. And then obviously D'Angelo behind him. But there are guys like, names you may not remember, like DeMonte Lott and Jernell Cross and Darrell Flowers. And, people also forget that D'Angelo didn't play his sophomore year. He didn't play his sophomore year because we were too talented. That's really something that's hard to grasp, is you've got a guy that, played at a very, very high level in the National Football League that, was up for the Heisman Trophy that didn't get to play his sophomore year. That's very rare. That's very rare here. Growing up in my officiating career, I worked a lot of Texas high school football, and a lot of games with, Plano Senior High and, playing, maybe Highland Park, and maybe one or two of those guys on the whole field, if that, are going to play Division I football. And we had that number, on one team. So it's pretty incredible. And, Aaron Dixon was one of those guys I got to play with, and he was an all SEC defensive tackle at Arkansas. And again, just other people that, Kenneth Moore was a tight end for us. You had guys that could have gone on. Eric Winfrey ended up being a tight end at Arkansas Tech, names that some people aren't, very familiar with, but we had a supporting cast that was just outstanding.
You mentioned a bad memory you had earlier. I want to go a little happier route here, and I've got one particular game I want to ask you about. And anybody who lives in Northeast Arkansas or has followed Northeast Arkansas high school football over the last 20, 25 years, if you ask them about this game, it doesn't matter where you're from or what your favorite school is. Mentioning this game is going to put a smile on your face. And I was fortunate enough to get to cover this game when I was working at the local ABC affiliate here in Jonesboro. And the atmosphere around this game, and I'm talking about the 1999 regular season game between Wynne and Osceola, the atmosphere of that game was something that I had never seen to that point. And as far as a high school game goes, I've not seen an atmosphere like that since. So let's get the insider perspective here from a guy who played in that game.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, you're talking to a guy that's been very fortunate. The world of sports and the game of football in particular have been really good, to me and my family. My dad worked in the Southwest Conference for many years and enjoyed a 13-year career in the NFL, worked a couple Super Bowls. And so as a kid, I was fortunate to, go to the Texas OU game when Texas made a goal line stand in 1994 to beat OU by, 3 points or 4 points or whatever it was, and to go to conference championships and things of that nature. And as a college football player, the first game I ever played in my redshirt freshman year, the very first game of the season was between the hedges at Georgia, and we played at Texas A&M, and you name it. I mean, so there's some really, really cool places. I've been fortunate enough to officiate 4 Texas OU games. The Peach Bowl, some other things that are just really. I've worked Alabama a couple times. But when you look at all of that, there's nothing that I would trade for that experience that we had that night. And it's something that is right up there with all the rest of those that I just named. I mean, the irony behind that, which is crazy, is that I started having back spasms really bad on Thursday. I mean, it was bad enough to where I was seeing a chiropractor basically around the clock. And I was scared going into it because I didn't know how my back was going to react. But I say that to say that when we came out for pregame warm-up, the stands were packed. And it was the most electric thing I've ever been a part of. So needless to say, when we busted through the banner with the band playing and it was us versus them, number 1 in the state versus number 2 in the state, I had no pain in my back. I mean, it was all gone. It was pure adrenaline. And from the word go, it was, we had some payback. They beat us at home the year before in kind of an ugly loss, and we weren't leaving that field without a win. There's no way. And I don't think I could walk the next day, but I didn't feel my back one time that whole night.
We talk about the crowd that was there. I've heard different numbers over the years, and it seems like the further we get away from that, the bigger the number was. But, I've heard anywhere from
for sure,
from 10 to 11 to 12,000 people, and that kind of a crowd for a high school football game in Northeast Arkansas. Like I said, it's just unheard of, and I don't know that there's been a game that's come close to that since.
That was our night. There's no question. And I remember even pregame warm-up that, folks were 5 deep on the track, all the way around the track. And it was bizarre. I mean, there was law enforcement all over the place. And you just anywhere. I mean, people talk about how great, high school football is in the state of Texas, and it is. And I've seen a lot of it. But I haven't seen anything that rivals, that night. But just going back to the game, I remember – Coach Campbell put as he likes to do, the mad scientist, put a couple of wrinkles in his old trusty playbook that week that Clinton Gore didn't see coming. And Jerome Stegall faked a pitch and went 80-something yards for a touchdown within maybe the first series or the second series of the game. And that's when we all looked at each other and said, hey, this is our night. And the defense tightened up, and Aaron Dixon had a crazy game. Those guys, he was in the backfield. Every time you turn around, he was on top of the quarterback. Or, Bo, people forget that Osceola had Bo Mosley and Harold James. Mosley went on to play at Arkansas, and, of course, James was committed to Alabama at the time. They had a guy that played over the top of me, Clifton Lucky, that went on to play college football. And they were stacked and obviously had a long legacy of success there under Coach Gore. And they were a great team. And, Coach Campbell said something in the locker room that really that night has stuck with me for a long time. And he said, tonight we're going to break their will to resist. I think it's something that athletes, it's a mentality, it's a mindset thing. And when you understand that, you realize that it's just a battle of wills. Football is, at its primary sport, it's a very physical game. One of the questions that you had asked was, how has the game evolved over time? And, you can spread the field out and, you can hurry to the line of scrimmage and you can have different substitution packages and you can do all this fun, tricked out stuff. But at the end of the day, it's about discipline and physicality and who wants it the most. And you see that now with the successes that Clemson and Alabama have enjoyed. A lot of people have a lot of talent, but it comes back to those things, and those basic elements were no truer than that night at Osceola for sure. If you recall, it was cold, and, I've heard various numbers of – in fact, I was on a plane about 3 years ago to go work the Senior Bowl for the NFL down in Mobile, Alabama, and there was a guy on my plane, I guess, who had lived in Memphis, and he was going down to cover the Senior Bowl, and he saw my Big 12 bag, and we got to talking, and anyway, come to find out, played at Wynne in that year, and he remembered being there covering, from Memphis, because Harold James, who played at Osceola, had committed to Alabama at the time to be a running back, and there's a long story behind how all that went down, but it was just weird being on a plane, from Dallas to Mobile, Alabama, with a guy that was just telling me how great that Osceola Wynne game was in 1999.
Tab, you had the experience of obviously playing here in NEA in high school at Wynne, but at the same time, you went on to play at the collegiate level as well. If you would just kind of talk about that, and is there, from your perspective, anything unique about that scenario?
Yeah, I think it's unique. I had, was fortunate enough to have quite a few scholarship offers from, different schools around the country. And, it was very special because that week leading up to the Osceola game, Jerome and I both did something that we said we wouldn't do, which was commit early, and we both committed to Arkansas State the same week. And so that was special. The pressure was off a little bit. There were still a lot of coaches there at that Osceola game watching, and certainly the recruiting process didn't stop. But it was just cool to know that, I'm going to go play. And Jerome and I were really, really close friends growing up. All through baseball and the all-star teams and all that. I was the 4-hitter, or he was the 3-hitter, or the other way around always. And so it was just really cool to be able to go, play college football with him. And we remain, close friends to this day. Just saw him a couple weeks ago. But, we didn't have anything else to do in Northeast Arkansas. You're either pulling stills on a rice farm for one of my buddy's dads or getting in trouble. So the best thing to do was to, stick to sports. And it was very important in those towns. It was really cool. I traveled back to Wynne for the first time in a number of years, a couple of weeks ago, and got to go in the old field house. And at the time when we built that, my sophomore year, it was the first ever indoor practice facility in the state of Arkansas. And,
wow.
It's like 50 yards long, and now you got, every school there has got a big one that's 3 times the size of the one we had at Wynne. But, the town was very progressive. They're very supportive in what we did. Sports are very serious around there. And on a national level, I think it's something that people don't pay enough attention to, whether it's baseball. I believe that one of the Little League World Series teams came from Arkansas recently and competed at a really high level. But there's a lot of talent, around there. And it was cool to stay home and be loyal. When I was really young, my dad was an official in the Southland Conference when Arkansas State was still in the Southland Conference, and I would go during the games to the little places in the concourse where you could get the war paint put on your face and, the feathers and the whole deal. And Running Joe was the mascot, and that was back at a time where I'll just leave it at that. Running Joe was the mascot. And it was really cool for me to wear war paint on my face. It was really cool for a kid. And so there was always that level of interest in the program, and and then support of people. That was really cool because there was kind of this walkway between our practice fields at ASU and our locker room, and at times, people would bring their kids up to whatever they did in Jonesboro, go to the mall and get shoes from Wynne or whatever it is. And they would stop by practice and catch me coming off the practice field. And, sometimes I could spend some time with different kids from Wynne on the field, running around, or they could play catch with one of our star receivers. I mean, it was just things that you got to enjoy that if I'd have gone off to, any other place, that just would have been different, And then, you had Coach Campbell and folks around, and I got a chance to keep up with what was happening in Wynne. And again, D'Angelo coming there the next year and playing just made it, all that more special. And then obviously I had lots of friends from Wynne that went to school. It was hardly a day that went by that I didn't see somebody on campus from Wynne.
What would you say is your favorite memory of playing at Wynne?
That's a good question. That it's really hard to, that takes the cake.
Sure.
But there are a couple, historically, we talked a lot about OCO, but Newport was the, legacy rival of Wynne from as early as I can remember. And they had great players. Chris Ellis, if you guys remember the name Chris Ellis, I don't know what happened to Chris Ellis, but he was a stud. Everybody was recruiting him at some point in time. And you guys will recall the name Brian Rucker from Newport, who went on to play at Arkansas State with me. And Brian Rucker was my arch nemesis from the time we were in 7th grade, to the time we beat the crap out of him my senior year in high school. And then we became very close friends and teammates, at Arkansas State, still a friend of mine to this day. But we hammered Newport pretty good my senior year, which was an awesome experience. And we knew we had something pretty special that year when we put up the kind of numbers we did in that game. And then one that most folks probably won't remember, but still stands out really, really big in my mind is we beat Batesville really bad, which I'm still very proud of. And I'm sorry for anybody from Batesville that's listening to this podcast. But the reason I say that is we had gone to Batesville my sophomore year, and they beat us in an upset. And there were people in the parking lot saying certain things, and then going out of town, there's a big area where there's a lot of woods there, and there were students or whatever they were that were waiting in the woods to throw rocks and stuff like that at the bus. And so I remember vividly sitting in the back of that bus and us vowing to each other, the next time we came back here, we were going to put a hurting on them. And boy, we did my senior year. We beat them up bad. That was a great memory. Still a great memory. Still kind of makes me mad, too.
Rivalries never die, Tab. They live on forever.
Never die.
From my high school days, I mean, there's still certain schools, and you mentioned their name, it just kind of puts a scowl on my face because I'm like, no, not happening.
Well, it's funny because Coach Campbell and I in that game, I wouldn't say we got into it, certainly. I had way more respect for him than that, but I wanted to play defense the whole game, and he didn't want me to play defense. Didn't see the need for me to play defense, but ended up being the, player of the game. You go, well, how does the offensive lineman get player of the game? Well, I ended up with a ton of tackles and a sack and a fumble recovery and, who knows how many pancake blocks. That was another game that I was playing on pure attitude and adrenaline the whole time, right? There was no stopping in that game.
So, Tab, you mentioned a little bit earlier about being an official. Tell us about Tab Slaughter in 2019. You're a Big 12 official, and you've been doing that for several years now, right?
Yeah, I've been in Dallas for 14 years. Graduated from Arkansas State in December of 2004 on a Saturday and started working in Dallas on a Monday, so didn't have much chance to slow down or anything, but it's been great. It's a great area. We love it here. I'm married to a lady I met at Arkansas State. We have 4 great kids who are all in, high, competitive sports now, which is awesome. I love that. But, going back to starting work that December, I got till about maybe the beginning of March. And I'll recall there was like a 2:00 in the afternoon one day, and I called my dad and I said, man, I got to get back around football. I had an opportunity to stay there and coach at Arkansas State and maybe go that route. It's something I'm passionate about, still coach kids sports and love that, and probably would have loved a career in that, but decided to take a different route. But it was very evident very, very quickly that I needed to get back around the game. And truthfully, growing up around the officiating world, it's just something I never thought about. It's not that I thought that it was weird and I was a player and Dad was an official. It was just something I never thought I would do. Never really even thought about it. And so I called him and said, if I were to get into it, what would I do? And he's like, well, you got to, join the chapter and get a whistle and the flag and the uniform and all that stuff. So that's what I did. And I joined the local high school chapter and really, really enjoyed it. And, so I've been working football since, I guess, the spring of 2005 at some level. And, working in the state of Texas is great because at the high school level, they don't play federation rules like they do in Arkansas. They play NCAA rules. So pretty shortly after I began, a couple years later, I was able to work some Division III and Division II ball because there was no differences in the rule book. And then I moved up into SCS ball, into the Southland, which Arkansas State used to be a part of. And then when I joined the Southland, they're part of a officiating conglomeration of the Big 12, the Mountain West, and the Southland Conference called the CFO West group of officials. And so I was in the Southland for one full year, a split crew in the Mountain West the next, and this will be my seventh year on a Big 12 crew.
Any good stories about maybe an interaction with a coach during a game, or with a player, or even some fans that just kind of sticks out and is a good one to tell?
Yeah, there's a lot, as you can imagine. There's a lot of stories there, but honestly, by and large, it's. Our relationship with the coaches is really good. To some extent, we're always going to be cats and dogs or oil and water or whatever you want to say. Those guys are under a lot of pressure and put a lot of time and energy into what they do, and they have a high expectation of what we do. Some of them don't, fully realize or appreciate the fact that whatever expectation the external world has on us, we have that much more and a lot more, on ourselves. But at times it can get heated, and there was a time, in my first Big 12 game, and Oklahoma it was notorious for running, a fast-paced, hurry-up offense. And this is before we had 8 officials, and Oklahoma got a first down, and I thought they substituted. And so I held them up and allowed the defense to match up. Well, the problem is they didn't substitute. And so I held them up, and I guess they had a play call where, they got a first down. They were going to come right into a certain package without substituting their personnel, and they were going to go for the end zone. They were going to strike. Well, I've ruined that parade because I held them up. And anyway, long story short, I think they ended up having to settle for a field goal. But Coach Stoops wanted to talk to me afterwards, and he remembers this to this day. I talked to him about it in the spring. And he was gonna test the rookie, Big 12 guy. They all know who's rookies and who's been around for a long time. This young guy who's hot to trot umpire coming in here holding my offense up when he shouldn't be, and he's going to let me know about it. We did that, and he stayed on me through the course of a big part of the game. And finally, I went over to him, Coach, and I said, "Coach, I'm sorry. I thought you substituted. I was going to give him a chance to match up. I would have done the same thing if it was the other way around." He slapped me on the rear end and goes, "Good. That's all I wanted to hear you say." Smiled at me, and then that was it. And that was the last time we ever had a
lot of coaches, that's all they want to hear is that you admit you were wrong. And a lot of people won't do that, in any point of life, but especially in officiating, I've noticed that over the years with some of our local officials here. If they'll just come up and be like, "Look, I blew that call. Now sometimes it might bite you, but in I guess in that instance, it kind of paid off.
What they really want is communication.
Sure.
And that's what you got to give them. And yet another just quick funny story. We had Alabama and USC here at Cowboy Stadium back several years ago, and we go in to meet Coach Saban in the coach's locker room, and of course I'd never worked for him before, and it was really cool to be there. And he said that most people don't realize that my dad was a football official, and we were like, wow. Me and the referee kind of look at each other. Umpire and the referee, which I'm an umpire. You go to see both head coaches before the game, 90 minutes before the game, and we're kind of looking at it. You don't know. I mean, is this a setup? Is he joking? Nobody's smiling here. So, we kidding around or what? And he said, so, yeah, it always bothered me when people would get on my dad. It really made me mad as a kid, and I don't like that. It drives me nuts. And then he kind of cracked a smile, and he goes, I don't mean I'm going to be all over you today, because I'm going to be at some point. But it still bothered me when they got on my dad. But it's part of the deal, and the good coaches are too busy coaching to worry about, jumping all over us. But going back to your question, it's just players make mistakes and coaches send in the wrong personnel or make the wrong play call. And unfortunately, the human error element is a part of everything we do. And you just got to communicate. You got to communicate and really prepare to be the best you can, because it's not just the coaches that deserve it. The game deserves it, and that's the thing that I know you kind of had this on one of your questions that I enjoy the most about being official is the camaraderie with the crew and the accountability we have, to each other in the game to get it right. But the challenge of getting it right, that's a big burden, and some people can't operate under that level of pressure, under a bright light. But it's something that the best in our business really thrive on is being your best when it matters the most. And really it matters the most on every play, regardless of what level you're working.
Well, Tab, and you talk about that and getting the call right. Obviously one of the major differences between years ago and now is that you have the luxury of instant replay. So I kind of wanted to get your take on that, and since we use that, and I'll say this from a broadcast standpoint of when I'm up in the booth and I have the luxury of my crew shooting an instant replay at us, where I look and I feel for our high school officials in that whatever call they make on the field stands still, whereas you're playing at the collegiate level or in the NFL, you get to use instant replay. So if you would just talk about the implementation of that. And
I mean, I think if you ask any football official, they would tell you first and foremost we're a fan of the game of football, and that being the case, we just want it right. The game deserves for it to be right, whether the telecasts are too long or whether they're too short or whether we look at too much stuff. That's not for me to decide. It's not for us to decide. Obviously we want to, it's entertainment, so we want the entertainment to be smooth. But the players, all the stakeholders in the game of football deserve for us to get it right. And there's certainly no, we check our ego at the door, and if the guy bobbled on the sideline, we ruled it a catch. We want it to be made right. Replay is a living, breathing element of the game, like the catch no catch rule. That's just going to evolve and change, even more. After the New Orleans Saints issue last year, the NFL has experimented with various different facets of how they can integrate and use replay as a bigger asset to their game. College football has done things similar with the advent of command centers. I think most all Power 5 conferences have one now. The Big 12, ours sits right down the street actually from where I'm talking to you guys today. My office in South Lake. They're down in Irving. And we have a team of people there watching the game, and it's something where the conference, the athletic directors, coaches, players, fans, everybody wants to get it right, to the best we possibly can, and that's what we want. And really, when replay came in, it was like, replay guys, and there wasn't a lot of the technology they had was dated, and it was a very antiquated process, and it was really detached from the officiating crew themselves. But I'll tell you, today, like we had our Big 12 clinic, our annual clinic where we do our physicals and rules tests and a couple of days of meetings 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. And the test we take is exactly the same test that the replay guys take, and vice versa. The replay guys take, a rules officials test, because replay now, with the ability for replay to in some cases create a foul situation, they have to be in tune to everything that's happening, on the field of play all the time. An example of that would be if, on the field we wave off pass interference because we say the ball was tipped. Well, if the ball was never tipped, now replay has the ability to get involved and put a flag down, or roughing a kicker or something like that, or an illegal man downfield because the ball didn't cross the line of scrimmage. Well, if it did cross the line of scrimmage, then they can put a flag down in that situation if we made the proper announcement. So it's just going to continue to grow. Where it stops, I'm not sure. I know that they're studying the length of the game in college football. In the Big 12, I think we have the longest games with the most amount of plays, and it's a lot of offense. You guys see it every Saturday, and I've worked games that are 4 hours and 15 minutes before, and 73 to 68 scores. So whether that's good for the game or not, I don't know. It's a high level of entertainment, and I know that the ratings, have never been higher. It seems like we can't consume enough college football, but I'll just tell you from our perspective, more than anything, we just want to make sure whatever we do is not a part of the outcome of the game, and a big byproduct of that is making sure we get it right however we can.
In your career, between playing and now officiating, what would you say has been the biggest difference in the game from when you were lining up as a Yellow Jacket until when you line up as the umpire now for collegiate games? What's been the biggest change, either at the high school or the college level, that you've seen?
Oh man, it's changed a lot. I mean, obviously in Wynne, we were 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and 3 backs and 2 tight ends, and very rarely through the football, we were very consistent in what we did, even against teams that did throw it. But when I was playing high school ball, even teams that threw it weren't, they weren't going 5 wide, empty backfield. It just wasn't something, 7-on-7 didn't exist in Arkansas at the time, really, or at least not in the part of the state that we were in. And then shortly thereafter, you had, Gus Malzahn up in the northwest corner, which the last 2 bowl games I've worked the last couple of years have been with him, and so we've been able to talk a little bit about Northeast Arkansas football. Of course, that's where he cut his teeth in coaching there in Hughes, and duck hunting and things like that. So it's always bizarre when you're standing on the middle of the field in a bowl game talking about duck hunting in Northeast Arkansas. But the game is just a people game, and they're scattered all over the place. But you saw with a guy like him that brought that sort of offense, into Arkansas, it really changed the dynamic of the way the game was played in the state, and if you didn't like it, you better keep up, and so it's fun to watch it evolve, and I've certainly seen that a lot. When I got to Arkansas State, we were running a lot of, stretch running game, which was really started by the smaller, I guess, more athletic linemen at Denver when Terrell Davis was a running back. Nobody's got a guy, everybody's on a railroad track. Well, so what defenses started doing is they just started grabbing people, So if there's the defensive tackle and you've got 2 guys to block one, and one guy's got to get to the linebacker to make sure the linebacker's not running free on the running back, then the defensive tackle would just grab the guy trying to go to the linebacker. So, and of course back then, nobody thought about defensive holding from a defensive line standpoint, and I would talk to my dad about it all the time, and he's, we don't really see that much at the NFL level. And I would show him videos, and he's like, yeah, I know, it's creeping into our game too. And so officials the game's always changing, it's always evolving, it's always throwing something at you that you're not really prepared for. So even from an officiating standpoint, you've got to be progressive enough to think about what the game is doing and how our coverage of it and our mechanics are going to set up to give us the best opportunity to perform, and to make sure we're upholding the integrity of the game, the integrity of the rules the way that it should be. So, but now it's, defensive holding is something that we look for all the time. It's one guy trying to consume 2 people. A defensive player can can use their hands to push, pull, in an effort to get to the ball carrier or a loose ball, but they can't keep a lineman from trying to go where they're trying to go. And so, that's really that I wouldn't say the rule changed, but the ability for officials to catch that and police that a little bit better has helped offenses to function within the rules, but to execute the offense that they want. And then obviously it's really cool to Walt Anderson was my boss in the Big 12. Of course, he has been a referee in the National Football League for a long time. He worked Super Bowl, I think, 48. But Walt was the head of the Big 12 when I got in, and with the change in the Big 12 offenses at the time, nobody was running fast-paced, no huddle the way the Big 12 was, because you had, Coach Leach at Texas Tech that was running the run and shoot. You had, Coach Stoops, who was running a variation of Coach Leach's offense and his own offense. And then you had, Coach Gundy at Oklahoma State that was running the same thing. And shortly thereafter, Coach Briles at Baylor that was running something very similar. And shortly thereafter, Coach Holgerson at West Virginia, and, so on and so forth. And it was like every team in the Big 12 was running some variation, with the exception of TCU at the time, which has changed, was running some variation of that offense. And, what Walt Anderson was progressive enough to figure out was just, if we just keep working the game with 7 officials, the game is outpaced us. We don't have the ability to administer substitution mechanics and work a game that's very difficult to work at a high level at the same time. So we experimented for a couple of years with the 8th official, which now if you watch a college game, you see a C on their back. That's the center judge. I was actually a part of an 11 o'clock kickoff back in, I think, 2012, and that's the first game in college football. 11 o'clock kickoff at TCU is the first game in college football where the 8th official had ever been used. That was really cool. They had an A on their back at the time because they didn't know what to call it, so they just called it the alternate official, put an A on their back. 2 years later, it changed, and they became the C. And I think the first year, the Big 12, and I want to say the ACC adopted it, and then 2 years later, all the Power 5 had the 8th official, because it to keep up with the game, we had to evolve, and it gives us the best chance to get it right on the field by having the kind of coverage we need in a game that evolves all the time. Now it's what they call the RPO offense. They're not just spread, but they're running an RPO, which some people may not know is the run pass option. So, not only does the offense fool the defense into thinking it's a run, they fool the officials into thinking it's a run. So, just from a legal man downfield standpoint, I'm reading the lineman coming up to the second level to block a linebacker, and the next thing I know, I see a ball go flying over my head. And, you've got to evolve to be able to work that. Not only, think about this element, not only to work your legal man downfield, but you might would have offensive pass interference on an offensive lineman in that example. And I've called a few of those, and we've called them in the Big 12, because if you got a lineman that's engaging a block more than 1 yard downfield and the ball crosses the line of scrimmage in the same third of the field, then by rule you have offensive pass interference. So that's something that even 5 years ago, if you told that to an official, they would have looked at you like you had 4 heads. But now it's a very real thing because of the challenges that the game throws at you as it evolves.
Wow, that's a lot that you've seen over your career, just in the rule changes alone. I mean, and to keep up with all that on the fly like you guys do, man, I tip my hat to you. If you're friends with some SEC officials, they may tell you that I act differently at ball games, but I do respect what you guys do, and tip my hat to everything you guys keep up with on the fly, and manage to not get yourselves run over by some of these beasts that are out there on the field as it is.
Yeah, my goal is to work next week. They're a lot bigger and meaner than I am anymore, so I'll stay out of the way the best I can.
So I got one last thing I'm going to throw at you here, Tab, and then we'll let you get out of here because we've taken more of your time than I anticipated. But with your connections in the officiating world, do you think you can get me a copy of Ed Hockeylee's workout routine?
Yeah, maybe so. He's hard to keep up with, though, because there's a lot that people have seen, from Ed over the years, but he is an extraordinary guy, and one of the things that just really impresses me, I've had the good fortune of being around him a little bit, is, of course, he's been retired now. Last year was his first full year off the field, but the level of work, the amount of work and detail, even when he was in his, 30th year or whatever, that he put into the game was just really hard to fathom. I mean, just a great guy. Obviously stayed in great physical shape, but a guy, who still practices law and puts that amount of time into it and still, the quality of work that he did, that late in his career is pretty outstanding. And there's no doubt Ed could have gone on for as long as he wanted to go on, but we get that all the time. I'll still stay in pretty good shape, and from time to time I'll hear a fan say, "Hey, are you trying to look like Ed Hockley?" That's the going joke these days. Any official that's been in any shape, you must be trying to be like Ed Hockley. So.
Yeah, well, hey, that if you've seen the man's arms, for anybody that's listening to this podcast, if someone says you're trying to be like that, I would take it as a compliment and run with it, man.
That's right. I'm okay with that. Yeah, you could certainly shoot for a much lower bar. There's no doubt.
Tab, we can't thank you enough, man. As we mentioned, you were the first guest here on our NEA Varsity Podcast, and man, we've really enjoyed this, and I'm sure I could come up with questions to throw at you for another hour or so, but we've taken enough of your time, and like I said, just can't thank you enough for being a part of this show.
Thank you very much.
Well, Marcus, Ryan, I really appreciate it. I appreciate what you guys are doing for sports, and not only sports, but in Northeast Arkansas, which is a place that means a lot to me. So, good luck in what you're doing, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll if the Yellowjackets make a big playoff run this year, we may try to get back with you later in the season.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
There you go, our very first interview on the NEA Varsity Podcast, former Wynne Yellowjacket offensive lineman Tab Slaughter. Ryan, that was a great interview, man. I really enjoyed talking with Tab, and like I told him, I think I could have come up with questions for another hour or so just to pick his brain with some of the games that he's been a part of, not only as a player at Wynne, but also at Arkansas State, and then his officiating career, high school football in Texas. I didn't even get to really touch on that.
Right.
Some of the names that he had dropped out there, Highland Park and Plano, and if you know anything about Texas high school football, those teams are the Cadillacs and the Lexuses, and I really enjoyed that.
Well, he's a guy that has a plethora of knowledge and multitude of different things. From an official standpoint, officiating at such a high level. Then, of course, his experience here in Northeast Arkansas, talking about playing in high school and at the collegiate level. He's proud to be from here, and as he mentioned, and it was fun getting his take on different things.
Absolutely, that's a different look. I've spent a lot of years covering high school sports from the TV side, and you've done some your stuff with the magazine, and then you've got a taste of the TV as well. But to be a player and to have that perspective on it, it's just a little different than what you and I get to see. We get to see more than the normal fan sees, but you take it down to that next level. And when you have that high school game when there's 11,000 people in the stands and you're on the field and contributing to your team, to me that's really cool, and that's the inside stuff that most people never get a chance to see.
No doubt about it.
Well, that'll just about do it here for episode 2 of the NEA Varsity Podcast. Once again, we want to thank Tab Slaughter for coming on and being a guest with us, and we've got a few more guests that we're going to try to get lined up here before football season starts, because once football season starts, it's going to be all about the NEA Sports Suncom game and the Tubetown game of each week. We're going to come in, we're going to preview the games coming up, and then once we get into the season and we've got games to recap, we'll recap the previous week's game and then look ahead to the following week. And then once we get finished up with football, we'll move right into basketball. So we got a lot on the table that we want to get to over the next several weeks. And Ryan, tell us where we can find the NEA Sports Suncom game every Friday night once the season starts.
High school game of the week for us is on the Suncom Media Facebook page. That's SONCOM, Suncom Media Facebook page, and we go live each and every Friday night.
And we do something very similar. Our games will be live on the Tubetown Facebook page. If you go to Facebook.com and search for Tubetown, we'll pop up there in your little search box. We will also be live on the Tubetown YouTube page. Same procedure, just at YouTube instead of Facebook. You can go and search YouTube for Tubetown, and it'll come right up there. And the biggest thing that we're adding to the mix this year is we're going to be live on our Amazon Fire Stick app. So that's a new one for us. So we've got 3 different platforms we'll be live on there, and we'll be there 8 out of the 10 weeks for the Arkansas season. And Ryan, I think you guys have 9 games. Is that correct?
We have 9 games this year. Yes,
there
sir.
you go. So a lot of football to be covered by both of our organizations, and we hope you guys come along for the ride. And until the next time, Ryan Fletcher, Marcus Carlton, this is the NEA Varsity Podcast.